All right, so buckle up because today we're going deep into a declassified CIA report from 1993.
Oh, wow, 1993.
Yeah, it's about the impact of sanctions on Serbia.
Okay.
And you might be thinking, CIA report from the 90s, why should I even care?
Yeah.
But trust me, this one's surprisingly relevant, whether you're into history or economics or just kind of curious about how sanctions actually work, like what happens on the ground, you know?
Yeah.
This deep dive is going to give us a really fascinating glimpse into a country under a whole lot of pressure.
Yeah. So what we're going to be looking at is basically how Serbia back in 92, facing these UN sanctions,
Yeah.
dealt with the economic squeeze.
Right.
This report, it was actually prepared for a special Balkan task force, and it paints a much more complex picture than just like a simple story of suffering.
Yeah, it wasn't just about tightening belts or, rationing. It was about finding loopholes,
Right.
adapting industries, and even, maybe a little bit of government sanctioned smuggling. So imagine, like, you're in a country suddenly cut off from most global trade. How would you keep the lights on? Like, literally, how would you keep the lights on?
Well, the report actually tells us that Serbia had stockpiled a decent amount of oil.
Really?
Yeah, enough to last for months, it seems like. They weren't totally caught off guard.
Hmm.
But of course, that wouldn't last forever.
Right.
So they had to get creative.
So what did they do?
Well, the report kind of hints at this tolerated smuggling thing happening. And it also mentions that the government started raising prices for, like, fuel gas electricity.
Wow.
They even devalued their currency, the dinar.
It's like a huge financial juggling act.
Oh, absolutely. And it's fascinating to think about how all those moves would have impacted daily life for people.
Yeah.
Imagine dealing with rising costs for, like, all the basic things you need.
Right.
And on top of that, your currency is fluctuating. Who knows what your money is going to be worth tomorrow?
Yeah.
The report even mentions things like rolling brownouts and limited heating hours to try and conserve energy.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine bundling up at home because the heat got shut off at 8 p.m.?
Yeah. I mean, it paints a picture of resilience for sure,
Yeah,
but also a level of hardship that I don't know if we can fully grasp.
absolutely. And speaking of hardship, let's talk about food.
Okay.
Because Serbia was a huge food exporter before the sanctions hit.
Right. So what happened when those export markets dried up? Did people start going hungry?
The report says no.
Really?
Yeah, agricultural production was down, for sure,
Okay.
but they still had enough food to go around domestically.
So it's almost like the sanctions accidentally pushed them towards being more self-sufficient?
Yeah, at least for a little while.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But I bet those rising prices still hit people's wallets pretty hard.
Oh, you're right. The report definitely mentions that basic necessities started eating up a much bigger chunk of people's incomes.
Yeah.
They were feeling the pinch, but here's where it gets really interesting. A lot of Serbians actually had access to hard currency, like dollars, euros, that kind of thing,
Okay.
estimated at around $2 billion.
Wow.
And they could use this on the black market. So it wasn't just empty shelves and bread lines.
Right.
There was this whole other economy running in the shadows.
And that's not all. Remember Zastava,
Zastava?
Serbia's largest vehicle manufacturer?
Yeah. Weren't they shutting down and laying off workers all the time?
They were. The report describes multiple shutdowns and layoffs.
Wow.
But then the government stepped in with loans to help them diversify production. Like, can you imagine the uncertainty for those workers?
Yeah, going from making cars one day to who knows what the...
Exactly. A real roller coaster. And you know what's really interesting?
What?
The report highlights some companies that actually use the sanctions as a chance to become more efficient.
Really?
Yeah, it's like this forced streamlining process.
Wow, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Right, and let's not forget about all the financial maneuvering that was going on.
Oh, yeah.
The report details how Serbian firms were moving money to offshore accounts using aliases, exploiting loopholes. It's almost like a financial escape route.
So we're seeing a story of hardship.
Yes.
Yeah. But also this incredible ingenuity and resilience on like a national scale.
Absolutely. And this is where the report's long-term view comes in, because they predict that keeping these sanctions in place is going to end up hurting Serbia's ability to modernize and compete in the global economy.
Yeah.
It's like slowly draining their potential.
And they even suggested even harsher measures might be needed, right?
Yes. The report actually suggests that freezing assets and punishing anyone who violates the sanctions
Wow.
might be necessary to force Serbia's hand in the political arena. It's a reminder that sanctions are often about way more than just economics.
Right?
They're a tool, a lever for political pressure.
This is already painting such a complex picture of how sanctions actually work.
Yeah.
Not just the intended consequences, but the ripple effects, the workarounds, the human side of it all.
Exactly.
And we're just getting started.
Yeah, we've only just uncovered the initial shock and the early adaptations.
Yeah.
But how did this all play out over time? That's where our deep dive continues.
Mm.
One thing that really stood out to me in this report was how much the Serbian people were already kind of used to economic challenges,
Oh, yeah.
even before these sanctions hit.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like it makes you wonder if those earlier struggles actually prepared them in a way.
Right, like maybe they were more ready for the sanctions because of it?
Exactly. The report mentions things like, periodic shortages and long lines for basic goods.
Wow.
And of course, those rolling brownouts we talked about, it seems like those weren't just a sanctions thing.
So they already had this built-in resilience,
Yeah, from years of navigating this difficult system.
Right. They kind of had a head start on adapting.
Exactly. And, we can't forget about that shadow economy we were talking about.
Right.
All that hard currency, the money being sent from family abroad,
Yeah.
the black markets, those were like lifelines for a lot of people.
It's like having a backup generator when the power goes out.
Perfect analogy. You're not at full capacity, but at least you've got some lights on.
Right.
Makes you wonder about how effective sanctions actually are,
Yeah.
as a foreign policy tool.
Yeah.
If so many people can still get what they need through those other channels,
Uh-huh.
does it really pressure the government to change?
Right. It's like squeezing a balloon on one end,
Exactly.
and the pressure just pops out somewhere else.
Yeah, it's this super complex system
Right.
with all these unintended consequences.
And the report actually kind of brings that up.
It does.
Like maybe even harsher sanctions are needed.
Right, like freezing assets,
Wow.
going after people who violate the sanctions.
Really targeting individuals.
Yeah, to get the results they want.
It really makes you think about the ethics of it all.
It does.
Like how much economic pain is it okay to inflict on ordinary people?
Right.
Especially if they're already struggling.
That's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And one that I think policymakers are constantly wrestling with, trying to find that balance between influence and minimizing harm.
And it's something for all of us to think about.
Right.
Sanctions aren't just some abstract policy tool.
Yeah, they have real-world effects on people.
This report really drives that home.
It does. It reminds us to look beyond the economics of it,
Yeah.
to the human cost
Right.
and the long-term implications.
Well said. I think this deep dive is really giving us a lot to think about.
I agree.
It's amazing to see how Serbia, in this specific context,
Yeah.
managed to adapt
And survive.
under such intense pressure.
And I think it speaks to something even bigger
Yeah.
about human resilience in general.
Right. When we face adversity, we get resourceful.
Absolutely. We find a way.
That's definitely a theme that's coming through loud and clear.
It is.
But what about those long-term effects we keep mentioning?
Yeah,
Did the report talk about that?
it did. And that's actually where we're going to pick up in the next part,
Okay.
looking at how these sanctions ultimately impacted Serbia's future.
This is like discovering a whole secret history,
Right.
One that most people probably don't even know about.
It is pretty amazing what you can learn from just one document.
Yeah.
This report has really given us a unique look into a really complex situation.
For sure. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I'm taking away from this is how resilient people can be, even when things are really, really tough.
Yeah.
We've seen how Serbia adapted to the sanctions, how they kept their economy going,
Yeah.
how they kept food on the table,
Right.
even when everything changed around them.
It really shows you how creative people can get when they need to be. But like you said earlier, we got to think about the ethics of it all, too.
Right.
I mean, sanctions can have some pretty long-lasting effects, even if they do work the way they're supposed to.
Yeah, that keeps coming back to me, How do we balance those long-term costs with the need to do something right now?
It's a tough question, and it's one that the report itself actually talks about. Remember how they predicted that if the sanctions went on for too long, it would hurt Serbia's ability to modernize?
Yeah, it was putting a limit on how much they could grow in the future.
Exactly. It's like those ripple effects you were talking about.
Yeah.
How the impact of sanctions can go way beyond the original crisis.
Oh, it feels like we're just scratching the surface here.
I think so.
This deep dive has been amazing, but it also makes me wonder about so much more.
And that's great. That's exactly what we want.
Yeah.
This is just the beginning,
Right.
If this report got you thinking, I encourage you to keep learning. Dig deeper into the history of sanctions. See how they've been used in different situations. Read about the debates around them. Are they effective? Are they ethical?
There's a whole world of information out there just waiting to be explored.
There is.
And this report gives us a good way to understand it all.
Absolutely.
It reminds us that history can teach us a lot about the problems we face today, and it can help us make better decisions about the future. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Serbia under sanctions, I hope you're walking away with a better understanding of how complicated this whole issue really is.
Yeah.
It's not black and white, you know?
Okay.
It's a mix of economics and politics and people's lives.
Definitely.
And it's something that we all need to pay attention to.
For sure.
Thanks for coming along on this journey with us.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating corner of the world.